Tim Graham is Director of Media Analysis for the Media Research Center, a great organization where AFR and AFA is proud to call them a co-laborer in the culture wars. Tim, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks. Yes, we're sitting here working today on the so-called embarrassing interview FoxNews.com had with Reza Aslan, who's tearing down the divinity of Jesus. The liberal media just loves that, and Brent's going on Fox to discuss it, and we're just sending him all the good stuff.
Now, this is, if I'm not mistaken, is this the Muslim scholar who was interviewed on Fox News by Lauren Green?
Yep.
And so having a Muslim scholar write a book about how Jesus Christ is not divine wouldn't be tolerated if the shoe was on the other foot, I don't think.
That's exactly right. There's nothing to say that obviously it's a free country and you can have, and we have had, so-called Christian authors denying the divinity of Christ,
right,
like Spong or Marcus Borg or any of these guys. And so, I mean, as you suggest, criticism of Islam, an author critical of Islam, is just not going to see the light of day in the quote-unquote mainstream media.
All right, well, tell our listeners, most of our listeners and those watching online probably have heard the Media Research Center, heard of them, seen Brent Bozell on different talk shows. But go ahead and tell our listeners what MRC does.
Well, we were founded in 1987. I signed up in 1989. And, from the beginning, we've always recorded TV news, and we have analysts sit and watch it every day, analyze it, see what they're covering, see what they're not covering, seeing what they're mangling as they cover it. And of course, also try to pay attention to the nation's major newspapers. And, of course, we monitor the news magazines while they were still relevant and publishing. So, I mean, we're trying to always keep track of how our national political discussion is mediated by the press, and always pointing out where they're displaying a dramatic liberal bias, an anti-Christian bias, all the biases we're used to.
We're talking to Tim Graham, who's Director of Media Analysis, along with Brent Bozell, who's MRC President, has written a fine book, Collusion, How the Media Stole the 2012 Election and How to Stop Them from Doing It in 2016. Tim, I got to tell you, this book made my blood boil, and I'll tell you why. I had kind of on some level remembered all the stuff you cover in this book as little drops of water, so to speak, but then reading it one incident after another, all in the same place, really is just infuriating, because it really makes clear that the so-called journalistic class, with some exceptions obviously, are now participants in the election process, and they generally favor one side. So go ahead and start laying out at least a little bit, and give us some time to pepper you with questions, but start laying out the case that you and Brent make in Collusion.
Well, I think the main point is, just as you suggest, is that reporters today are players. They're not referees. People need to understand that the news media today is in no way an honest broker. They are not referees of the political process. No one should see them that way. They are players. I would say that the advertising in between the newscasts is probably more reliable than the advertising for Obama that passes as news. And so let's start at the beginning. One of the things that Brent and I laughed at when we went back and looked at it again was how every Republican primary leader in the polls was attacked by the media with some sort of investigative scoop or scooplet right at the time they went to the top of the polls. And this was one of those things that was much funnier. Well, it could be funny after the election, but when we sat down after the election and you just started putting these things together at the time, and I think what we didn't realize as it was going by was every time it was whoever was leading. So Michelle Bachmann leads, and then Newsweek does this slimy cover on Michelle Bachmann, and ABC runs an undercover investigation of Michelle Bachmann's husband's clinic. This isn't even ABC's hidden cameras. They're the hidden cameras of a radical left group called Truth Wins Out. That's a radical pro-gay group. That's not objective reporting, and it's like if the mainstream media took an AndrewBreitbart.com video and said, well, this is our coverage for today. Liberal media would never stand for that. But, one after the other. Rick Perry, Newt Gingrich, they got the second wife to trash him for having an open wanting an open marriage, so on and so forth. They would always have a new scoop. Oh, Rick Santorum was the last one when he finally in the primaries, won the Iowa caucus. Then Newsweek had a story on how, your wife used to date an abortionist before you got married. I mean, they just had a field day with every one of these people. Now, with Romney, of course, this happens in May. After all the primaries are over, then comes his thing, and their so-called investigative bombshell was, we believe he pushed a kid down in high school and cut his hair involuntarily.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And so, who's the person that is not investigated in this fashion? Barack Obama. The same Washington Post that published a 5,000-plus word story on Mitt Romney's brutality with a haircut scissors, then a month later runs a 5,000-word excerpt from one of its editors' books all about how Obama loves basketball. That was their scoop. And what's hilarious about that is this editor, David Marinas, when you actually read the book, and I have to confess I didn't read this book until after the election, in this book he very explicitly lays out that Obama's memoir, Dreams from My Father, is fictional. He said that it qualifies as literature. And yet, Marinas never says this in the pages of the Washington Post before the election. And that's just fascinating. They ran 5,500 words on him about Obama's love for basketball and his high school basketball career.
Well, we're talking with Tim Graham, who is the co-author of Collusion, How the Media Stole the 2012 Election and How to Stop Them from Doing It in 2016. And this is today's issues on American Family Radio. Jim Stanley alongside Ed Vitagliano. Tim, one of the things that you mentioned is that the media was advertising for Obama. Do you feel like that's still the case now, or do you feel like they're holding him a bit more accountable?
Well, we had that one period in May where the scandals seemed to all break out at the same time, and that was sort of extraordinary. And that was a moment. A lot of times people will come to us and say, "Well, is this it now? Has the media finally turned?" Mm-hmm. And I don't think the media is ever going to turn. I think that Obama could be out of office for 20 years, and the media will still hail him as worthy of Mount Rushmore. There may be bad days for Obama. There may be a bad week. But there's never a bad year with these people. And so what we've been trying to hit here at the Media Research Center for the last month or so is, where are the Obama scandals? The House Oversight Committee had a hearing into the IRS that really linked the Obama administration to the harassment of Tea Party groups. People inside the IRS headquarters in Washington said, we were told to send our reports to the chief counsel of the IRS, which was unusual. But the chief counsel is an Obama appointee. And yet, the media will run around and say, there is no evidence that Obama's connected to this. Right. And that's, they are like a secret service. They're always protecting him from any accusation that perhaps he doesn't have sterling ethics.
Well, let me ask you this. How do we bring the media to a better account of accountability and get them back to reporting the news instead of making the news?
I think the goal is, a lot of times, is to report our own news and try to make them pick it up. We are growing now an alternative conservative news media. We have CNSnews.com here in the building. Mm-hmm. Fox News, blogs, talk radio, all sorts of outlets of people who are breaking the news. Sometimes what it really, even on a day, is you can look at Obama's remarks and break them down and say, you know, you will often find that the networks find what they think are the happiest, most Obama coddling sound bites and use those. I mean, here he was, I guess it was last week, where he suggested to a Vietnamese that Ho Chi Minh, the communist dictator, was inspired by R. Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. What kind of lame-brained suggestion is that? And the media didn't cover that.
Yeah.
Tim, let me ask you this. Let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Liberals, after George Bush was elected in 2000, said and have continued to say it, Bush stole the 2000 election from Al Gore. So when you and Brent Bozell say that the media stole the 2012 election, isn't this just the conservative version of a similar type conspiracy, but it's the mirror image of the Bush stole the 2000 election?
Well, that is a good question. I think that to some extent this is a sales title. Obviously, this election was not as close as Bush Gore, but it was close. I mean, this is the funny thing is. This is a 4 or 5 point race, wasn't it? And they suggest that this was a massive landslide thumping. If you listen to the media talk about it,
yeah, because the electoral votes, piled up at some point. So they, 332 to 206. They say that is a substantial victory, but it wasn't in the popular vote a landslide.
Well, I would just puckishly suggest to you that, yes, after 2000, the Democrats were not fond of the Electoral College, and they talked about
right.
abolishing it. No, but the point where we talk about the media stealing the election is look at these scandals again, like the IRS scandal, which broke after we were done writing. The NSA scandal, the Department of Justice leak probes of Fox News and other reporters. These are scandals that we really should have heard about in 2012. And that's part of what we're trying to say, is that the media, by failing to report on Obama, presented a very distorted picture to the electorate of who was what. And I think that they very much liked and agreed with the Obama people that this was not really a referendum on Obama. Because they just assumed everybody knew that Obama was hope, change, and light. This was, for them, a chance to tell everybody that Mitt Romney would be an unmitigated disaster and there's no way anybody should ever vote for this guy. And early on they said, they told Politico, an unnamed Obama advisor, we're going to have to kill Romney. And nobody in the media reported that outside of Politico because, well, that sounds a little bit rough. It sounds a little bit thuggish. Well, these are exactly the sorts of things the news media doesn't want to focus on, is they don't want to report on anything that makes Obama look like a thug, look like a guy who plays political hardball, like getting your IRS to crack down on Tea Party groups. These are all storylines that they didn't want to talk about.
This is the program, Today's Issues on American Family Radio. Our guest is Tim Graham, co-author with Brent Bozell of Collusion, How the Media Stole the 2012 Election. And Tim, my question now goes along with the subtitle, How to Stop Them from Doing It in 2016. So we've talked about getting our own news out, as you mentioned a few minutes ago. But what can we really do to prevent the media from doing the same thing in 2016?
Yeah, well, the news media, I guess this is the hard part. You sort of expect the news media to do exactly what they usually do. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been at this now for a long time. I can't say I'm tremendously optimistic that they're going to be fair and balanced in 2016, but there are certain things that can be done. And as we've already discussed, there is the conservative media. There is conservative media watchdogs hammering on this in every news cycle between now and 2016. That's obviously important. But I think where the first place we talk about as conservative Americans is we have to get the so-called mainstream media out of our primary debates in the Republican Party. There is no excuse or reason to have our primary candidates being in debate